you all stand.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So the part which we did in the last class, so that was not the part of second chapter.
No, that was the part of the second chapter, but I want to specifically start the stages of sexual reproduction in flowering plants there, because ultimately you get these things as PDF. If you want like these notes, the blackboard scribbling that we do during the class, you can get them as PDFs. So I just want it to be segregated. Okay. It is a part. I'm just going to start the stages here. So I already made you understand the different parts of the flower, right? We have just done the foundation. Today we'll go into. Okay. So let's begin. So before that, let me ask some questions. So the question is for Fatima. Fatima, tell me, what do you understand by the term androecium? We discussed androecium. Androecium and gynoecium. We discussed these terms. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
We have. So what is androecium?
Androecium is stamen.
Yes, the word andro is always associated with male reproductive system. Did I tell you this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, and how many parts stamen have?
3.
What are those 3 parts?
Stigma, style, and ovary.
No. That is not
anther and filament.
Fatima.
Yes, sir.
That is pistil, or which we call carpel, or we also call it gynoecium. Remember?
Yes, sir.
Everyone, before I start with stages here, please open the last class notes and go through it quickly. Yes, Arpit, tell me about pistil. What do you understand by pistil?
So pistil is basically the female reproductive part of the plant. So pistil has 3 parts, that is stigma, style, and ovary. So it is also known as carpel or gynoecium.
Yes. And where does a gamete formation takes place in plants?
So in the
Ovaries.
In angiosperms. So in ovaries, only the female gamete, which is known as the oocyte, equivalent to a female gamete, is formed. Where is the male equivalent gamete formed? Where is the male?
Anther.
Yes. And what are they called? What are they called? They are called pollen grains. The male gamete equivalents are called pollen grains. See, you cannot forget things. Okay, keep revising things. If you forget things, it is going to be difficult to connect in the next class. Now in today's class, we will be discussing about stages of sexual reproduction in plants. Now the what part we have done. Today we'll be doing the how part, and also we'll be going into seed and fruit if time permits. Okay, so let's begin. So what do you think are the stages? So how do a plant sexually reproduces? As I already we have discussed and I've told you, plants are immobile, correct? Yes or no? They cannot move. And because they cannot move, they cannot find a mate, and they cannot behave in a manner in which like animals. So they cannot find a mate and they cannot transfer the gametes on their own, correct?
Yes, sir.
So what can plants do instead? If you cannot move, if you are stationary, but still you have to transfer something to some other place, to some other person, what will you depend on?
An external factor.
Yes, an external factor that will deliver the things for you, right? You will depend on a service, a delivery service, correct?
Yes, sir.
Your gametes. Same thing plants do. So plants also make two different types of gametes or sex cells, which needs to be fused during the process of fertilization. So the actual biology remains similar, but how that biology is achieved is very different in plants and animals. Okay, so if you understand the concept, it's going to be same. So there has to be 2 cells one bringing N, yeah, haploid part or one copy of the genome, the other bringing another copy of the genome, and both have to fuse. Is it clear? Now, the first stage in the sexual reproduction in angiosperms hence becomes pollination. So pollination, you all have studied pollination in your lower classes. You know what is pollination? Quickly.
So the transfer
Transfer of pollen grains from what to what?
From like
to male part.
Yes, from anther to stigma. Now, pollination, this transfer depends on something. You said some agents. Now, those agents are called pollinators. Okay. And pollinators can be of two different types, living or non-living. Okay. And we'll come to all of that. But first, let me define pollination for you. So write down the first stages of sexual reproduction in angiosperm. The first stage is pollination. And write down, pollination is the process of transferring the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same or different flower. Present on same or different plant. Did you understand this? The definition? So basically, we have written all the possible scenarios in the same definition. So it's transferring the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, either of the same or different flower, present on the same or different plants. Okay. You can continue writing of the same species, but the species has to be same in order to undergo sexual reproduction successfully. Different plants of the same species. Now, is the definition clear to you? Anyone has any doubt with the definition? People, is it clear? Alia? Yes.
yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the agents are called agents that do pollination are called pollinators. So write down next line. The agents involved in this process are called pollinators. These pollinators can either be abiotic or biotic. Now, what does the word abiotic means?
Non-living.
Yes, the word bio means life, right? Remember biology, study of life. So bio is associated with life. So abiotic is non-living factors. So what are the non-living pollinators? Anyone? Any?
Wind, water.
Yes. Wind and air is the same thing. Someone said wind and air.
Sorry.
Yeah. They cannot be used exactly like in place of each other in conversations, but you understand wind, right? Moving air is wind basically. So there is air in the football. There can never be wind in the football. And wind and water, that's all. Any other abiotic factor? Yes, Alia?
Soil.
Soil. How can soil be a factor? See, yes, Alia, give me your reasons. What do you think?
Sir, I thought maybe the pollen grains fallen from the plant and
So even if pollen grains fall on the soil, that soil has to move, no?
yes, sir, it was.
Yeah. So if plants cannot move and they have hired some agents to transfer something, those agents should move. That's why I wrote wind, not air. Air is just air. It can be stationary also. Wind is never stationary. Wind is the blowing air. So that can carry something. Water again is flowing. It can carry something. Now soil, if it is moving, if you're saying soil is also being transferring, like sand gets transferred, but it's again because of wind, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, so soil cannot be a abiotic pollinator. So it will be wind and water. Okay. Now biotic ones, give me example.
Humans, animals.
Insects.
Sex.
Arpit. Nice. Humans, are humans pollinators? What do we pollinate? How are we pollinators? Are we pollinators? Who believes we are pollinators? Yes, Alia, Fatima. Arpit. Yes, you said humans. You should say your reasons. Why do you think, Arpit, we are pollinators?
There, if we go to the pollination, so we can be the factor.
We can be anything. Humans can be anything. They can take up any role in the environment. We can make or break the environment, but to
Sir, we are not natural pollinators, but then we can take the pollen grain and do pollination.
yes, so we are not natural pollinators. So basically natural means like in nature we are not pollinators because we are predators, and we do not, animals like humans do not tend to depend on flowers for something. You understand? You can call something a pollinator that has a relationship with the flower or that plant. Okay. Humans do not have relation like a close ecological relationship with flowers, or like now culturally we have a kind of relationship that we developed with flowers, but that is not biological, that is cultural, correct? When we take flowers from some place and bring it to some other place, or when we are artificially propagating plants, or we are artificially making them pollinate or cross-pollinating, self-pollinating, that is all we are doing out of our curiosity, right? That is not our biological role in nature. Do you understand, Arpit?
Yes.
So you understand why humans should not be called a pollinator?
Yes.
Because then pollinators like bees. So bees are natural pollinators because bees have a very, very strong relationship with flowers. And what is that relationship?
To take the nectar.
Nectar.
Yeah. It depends on flowers for the nutrition. Bee, like honeybees, they make honey from that nectar. Also butterflies, right? A lot of insects in general. And you can write snakes are also pollinators. And this is a question: which plant snakes pollinate naturally? Do you know? Anyone knows? Snakes also have a ecological relationship with some flowers. So this is your, make a star here. This was a question which once came in exam. Figure out which plants do snakes pollinate. Then birds, are birds pollinators?
Yes.
Yes, especially hummingbirds are pollinators. So you have to figure out which, I'm just giving you this as a to-do thing. It's interesting. Figure out which plants. How many of you have heard of which is the biggest flower?
Viscous.
Sorry?
Viscous.
Viscous. Is it the name of the flower?
Hibiscus, he's saying.
Hibiscus is not the biggest flower. Hibiscus is very small in front of the biggest flower. Anyone knows which is the biggest, largest flower on the planet? And it's a flower. It's an actual flower. Anyone? No one knows?
Corpse flower.
Yes, Alia?
The corpse flower. I don't know its real name, but it's also known as corpse flower.
It's also known as Bob's plant. Okay.
So corpse, like dead body corpse.
Corpse, yes, you're right. Perfect. And it is known as corpse plant because it stings like that. It stinks actually. It's not very, very soothing, but it also attracts a lot of, dead and decaying smell also attracts a lot of animals because a lot of animals are
Yes.
saprophytic, class 11th, saprophytes that depend on dead and decaying matter. So the word is Rafflesia. How many of you have heard Rafflesia? The name Rafflesia?
Not heard. I just checked it on internet.
Yes. What did it say? What did you check, Fatima? What did it say?
I checked largest flower in the planet.
And it says?
It's Rafflesia arnoldii.
Yes. It's Rafflesia. Can you spell it for me? Is it Rafflesia?
SIA.
SIA.
Yeah, SIA.
Yes. Okay.
Sir, it is double F.
Okay. Yes. So this is the flower. And you know how big it is? Because Fatima just figured it out. Fatima, would you like to tell something about Rafflesia? Because it's important. I'll tell you why I'm discussing this. So how big can be Rafflesia?
Sir, it's 3 feet tall.
Up to 3 meters.
20 pounds.
Sorry, Fatima?
20 pounds.
That's the weight. Big diameter. Something like that. Up to 3 meters surface
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
And 3 meter is quite big, no? What is the
It says 3 feet.
3 feet?
Diameter.
Diameter is 3 feet. Okay, height is 3 meters. So let's talk about the diameter. Even if it's the diameter, which is 3 feet, it's quite a big flower, no?
Yes.
You would not like to give someone a 3 feet long flower on their birthday or some occasion. So what do you think? It's a very big flower, a 3 feet big flower. What should be pollinating it? If it's a flower, it is for sexual reproduction. Do you think a bee would pollinate?
No, sir.
Large animals.
And what could be those large animals?
Python.
Snakes.
Yes, snakes are one of the large animals that actually use these flowers along with other animals also. There are many animals that use Rafflesia as their shelter. They live in the flower. It's so big that you can actually live inside it. So, and when you are moving in and out, you are also carrying the pollen. So snakes also pollinate Rafflesia. Will you remember this? Just write it down. Okay, moving forward, let's talk about pollination in a bit detail. So let's come to types of pollination. Before understanding types of pollination, we have to discuss one thing. Remember I told you bisexual and monosexual in the last class?
Yes, sir.
What is bisexual flower?
Bisexual flower in one flower itself, both the sexes are present.
Perfect. And then monosexual flower is one flower, right? In which only one sex is present. Either stamen or carpel will be there, right? And depending on whether a plant has bisexual flowers or only monosexual flowers, we can call it monoecious or dioecious. Remember, it's used for the body. A monoecious body or a dioecious body. Remember this term? Monoecious and dioecious?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now let's look at the scenarios. What could be the possible pollinating scenarios present? So for example, this is a plant, okay, on which there is a flower. So let's say this is the flower. Now this flower has both the structures. It also has a female structure and it also has a male structure. Is it clear? That's why it's a bisexual flower. So one scenario could be scenario 1, where the same anther from the same flower can fertilize the stigma of the same flower, right?
Yes, sir.
The second possibility is where on the same plant there are two flowers, right? Again, it also has anther. So this flower B, this is flower A, this flower can fertilize this flower, right? The anther will produce pollen. So pollen from flower B can go to can go to stigma of flower A, correct? Scenario 2. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Is there any difference between these two scenarios, or are they same thing?
They are different
How are they different, Fatima?
because they both are different flowers.
But it is the same.
Sir, can you repeat?
Yes, Arpit. What should I repeat? The scenario?
Yes, sir.
Scenario is in first case, the anther of the same flower is fertilizing the stigma of the same, like is landing on the stigma of the same flower. The pollen from the anther is landing on the same flower. And in scenario case 2, there are two flowers but on the same plant. Okay. And flower B is the transfer of pollen grain is happening from flower B to flower A. So I'm asking, are these two scenarios different or same? Fatima says,
This is different.
what is the difference?
Sir, in this second scenario, there is cross pollination, and the first there is self pollination.
So, but how is this cross pollination, Arpit? It is the same plant. There are two flowers on the same plant. Then don't you think the genes will remain the same?
Sir, but the flower is different now.
So do different flowers have their different genes?
No, sir.
Both the flowers are on the same plant. Fatima, what do you think? This is plant 1. Now let me complicate it a bit before we discuss it. This is the third scenario where there is another plant on which there is a flower, which is flower C. So this is a flower C. And if this flower fertilizes this, C fertilizes B. So this is plant 2.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Arpit.
Sir, the second flower is bisexual too.
All are bisexual. All flowers are bisexual. Okay. Let's just consider, for the sake of discussion, every flower has everything. So there are 2 plants and 3 flowers. Now this scenario A is a clear-cut example of self-pollination, right? Because it is happening on the same plant and also within the same flower. So this is very easy to understand. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And this other scenario where there are 2 plants involved, clearly they are 2 different plants, so they will have 2 different like genetic makeup. They are 2 different individuals. So scenario 3, where the flower C is pollinating flower B on 2 different plants, is also very easy to understand. This is a clear-cut example of cross pollination, right? Cross means between 2 individuals. Do you understand, Arpit?
Yes, sir.
Now what is this one where it is happening within the same plant but between different flowers? Is it cross or is it self? What is this one is the question. Yes, please tell me. Logics, arguments. Fatima. Where is Fatima Munir? Why is she not speaking?
I'm here. It's cross pollination.
Cross? Do you think it's cross? But I can just argue that the plant is same. How is it cross? But if you say it's self-pollination, then Arpit can come in and argue that there are 2 different flowers. Then how it is self? Correct?
Sir.
Yes, Arpit. What is the way out? How should we understand this? Alia. Mazia is silent from a very long time. Mazia, how are you? Not a interesting discussion.
So I think it's cross-pollination because each gamete has their own different genes.
Gametes are unique. Yes, you're right. So to understand it, it is a little complicated scenario. Yes, you are correct. But to understand self or cross, we first have to define what do we mean by self and what do we mean by cross. The word self means auto, right? Like auto means
Yes.
which,
On your own.
yes. Now, if you take flower as a system, this is happening between two different flowers. So clearly this is a cross flower pollination, right? Cross flower pollination, because it's happening between two different flowers, correct?
Yeah.
But it is still happening within the same plant. So it is self plant pollination also. Do you understand? Arpit and Fatima both?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
In junior classes, when you study these things, cross pollination, self pollination, we just study it to make foundation. Now when we go into details, confusions arise, and then this is where we have to learn some in-depth concepts as well. So in types of pollination, this first scenario is the first type, which is very easy to understand. Write down. The first type is self pollination, or also known as autogamy. The word auto means self, and the word gamy comes from union. Okay. So first is autogamy or self-pollination. Write down. Let's define it. In this pollination takes place. In this pollination takes place within the same flower. Within the same flower, where the pollen grains from the anther are transferred to the stigma of the same flower. Pollen grains from the anther are transferred to the stigma of the same flower. Is it clear, everyone? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now the second scenario, which is confusing here, which you think is cross, also it looks like self, we call it Geitonogamy. Geitonogamy. And the third one, which is cross, is called Xenogamy. So write down first Geitonogamy.
So you can't say specifically that it is cross-pollination or self-pollination.
We can say, we know that if we are talking about the plant, if we are talking on a biological genetic level, it is self-pollination. Because see, did the plant grow from one single seed? The whole plant? Yes
Yeah.
or no?
Yeah.
That seed must be containing an embryo. Yes or no? And that embryo was a zygote. Yes or no?
Yes.
So this whole plant developed from one zygote. If it is not a hybrid plant, which we have made through any vegetative propagation mode, correct? Remember
Grafting.
propagation, grafting?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So if you have made a plant through grafting, this is where it becomes even more complicated. Now suppose you have grafted a rose, a different variety of a rose on a different species of a rose stem. So in the same plant, you are having white rose, red rose, yellow rose on the same plant. Now there, if pollination is happening, it is between different varieties, it is even more complicated. Or even if it is the same variety, but two different plants also, two different individuals also, then if from one branch it is happening to another branch which was grafted, it becomes cross pollination biologically. Everyone is understanding?
No, can you explain once again?
Okay. Okay, let's not go to let's not complicate it first. So just understand that if there are two flowers on the same plant, okay, everyone with me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Look here. this is the same plant on which there are 2 flowers. Now we are assuming that it is a natural plant. It is not propagated through grafting, or we have not made a hybrid variety here. Okay, so we will
Yeah.
not, it is a natural thing. So to study naturally, this thing could be said a self-pollination with respect to the plant, because the genes are same, whether it is one flower or the other, it is on the same plant. So every part of the plant came from one single zygote, which was present in that seed in the form of embryo, from which the plant grew. Yes,
Yeah.
technically both these 2 flowers are like on the same body. So it is like the same gamete from the same body is fertilizing the same gamete of the same body, like in hermaphrodites. Do you understand, everyone? So from the perspective of a plant, we can call it self-pollination still. But since scenario 1 and 3 are very clearly self-pollination and cross-pollination, so we study the in between this scenario as Zygonogamy. Okay, just to make the difference. Is it understandable to you, Fatima?
Yes, sir.
So self-pollination you have all written. Write down Zygonogamy. And let's elaborate this. Write down in this type of pollination, or in this pollination process, Zygonogamy. In this pollination process, pollen grains are transferred. Pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower, to the stigma of another flower, but of the same plant. So for Zygonogamy, write down, because this is exact words that will be asked in question. Zygonogamy is called the pollination between 2 flowers, but within same plant. Clear? Clear to everyone? Between 2 flowers, but within the same plant. So if the question comes, the pollination which takes place between 2 flowers and within the same plant is known as
Zygonogamy.
Xenogamy.
yes, Zygonogamy. Autogamy is within the same flower. Then if it is within the same flower, the plant thing does not matter now, right? It obviously will be one single plant. So autogamy is purely simply within the same flower. So it's very clearly self-pollination. Now come to xenogamy, write down. In xenogamy, transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower.
So can you repeat, sir? I am a slow writer.
Yes, okay, no problem. What did I just say, Fatima, please?
From the anther of one flower.
No, from the beginning.
In xenogamy, transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower.
Yes. In xenogamy, the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, present on different plants takes place. Present on different plants takes place. So in less number of words, we can say xenogamy is between two different plants. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, if it is between two different plants, we do not have to worry about the flower. It's simple. Flowers always will be different. Correct? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So autogamy, geitonogamy, and xenogamy. Now, it is okay. Let me give you this as an assignment where you will appreciate what I am trying to say. Sometimes the same plant which can show autogamy can also show the other mode, which is, of course, the plant which can show autogamy can also show geitonogamy. This is clear because both the plants are on the same flower, right? But the plant which can show geitonogamy can also show xenogamy. Yes or no? Alia, do you understand?
Can you repeat?
Yes, your voice is very muffled, Alia. Please come a little closer to the mic. What did you say? Did she ask me to repeat?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I am saying geitonogamy is clear, right? Two flowers on the same plant for pollination happening between transfer happening between them, right? So a plant which can show geitonogamy, it can also show autogamy, correct? Technically, because it has both, it fits a bisexual flower, it can show autogamy as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. But I am asking, can a plant which is showing geitonogamy, can it also show xenogamy?
Yes, sir.
Yes, because all it is doing is transferring pollen to some other flower. Now that flower could be the flower of the same plant, or that flower could be the flower of some other nearby neighboring plant. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, perfect. So write down this as a in-class homework for you. You have to figure out 4 examples of plants. 4 examples of each: autogamy, geitonogamy, and xenogamy. And if possible, if you can find some plant which is common for 2, you will understand what I'm trying to say. If you are not finding, try to find some common, a plant which shows more than one type of pollination. Is it clear? I think when
Yes,
you will
sir.
find 4 examples of each, you will get the answer yourself. So shall I move forward? Is this part
Yes, sir.
clear to you?
Yes, sir.
This was the first stage. This is where sexual reproduction starts: pollination, pollinators, and types of pollination. These 3 topics are important. Please do read NCERT and also find out more examples on these. Okay, write down. There is one more mode which sometimes is asked in entrances. It's called cleistogamy. Cleistogamy. Write it down. Please, and when I'm telling you assignments, no, you do one thing. Make some kind of a mark or a question mark, because these are the questions that you will, after the class, go back and look at. So this has been asked once. I would ask all of you to go back and look at cleistogamy and bring me example for this. Then I will discuss. So I'm reserving this for later on because I have to tell you some other concepts as well. But everyone has written cleistogamy? Yes?
Yes.
Yes or no? Just write down.
Yes, sir.
This also you have to figure out as an homework. We will discuss everything again when you will come with the answers. Okay? Any doubts?
No, sir.
Now, let's say pollination happened. It happened successfully. What is the next step? What is the next logical step according to you? Biology becomes
Fusion.
Fusion.
Yes, you are correct. So biology becomes boring and worth mugging up and remembering when you do not understand the flow. It's like a flow of river. If you can understand the origin and the reason for flowing and the story, you don't have to mug it up. So clearly, if pollination has happened, if transfer has happened, now what will happen? Fusion between male and female gametes, correct?
Yes, sir.
Produced as a result of that fusion?
Gamete.
New flower.
Sorry, zygote.
Yes, Fatima. Gamete was already formed, no? That got transferred.
Sorry, it was my mistake. Accident.
Yeah, okay. So the second step which we will be discussing is formation of zygote. Right on. Second stage is formation of zygote, or in some books you will find it as fertilization event, which is the same thing, no? Okay. Now the pollen is at the doorstep. It has arrived to the female structure. But do you think any on a stigma? Let me make a stigma. So let's say on this stigma, a pollen is falling. Okay. This is one pollen that fell. This is another pollen that fell. There are multiple pollen. So do you think all the pollen will be of the same species?
No.
No, because there is no criteria till now. That has to happen is something has to carry something and deposit it on the stigma, right? And it's not like bees always stick to one species of flowers to collect the nectar. No, right? They go to different species. Am I right or not?
Yes, sir.
Different pollens from different species will also land on one stigma. So there'll be thousands of pollen landing on one stigma, out of which, what do you think is the first most important thing that this stigma has to do?
Has to be from the same species.
Has to?
Be from the same species.
It first have to make sure that the pollen which is going to fertilize with the ovum is of the same species, correct? Yes or no? But how will it do that? Can it talk? They cannot talk, right? So how will they interact? Any idea?
Some chemical.
Exactly. In biology, whenever there has to be cellular interactions, they are called biochemical interactions. So first, write down in the formation of zygote part, write down the first point. After successful pollination, a biochemical interaction.
What did you say? Biochemical interaction?
Biochemical interaction. After successful pollination, a biochemical interaction happens between the pollen and the pistil. Between the pollen and the pistil, which allows the pistil to recognize the pollen from its own species, which allows the pistil to recognize the pollen from its own species. Okay? Is it clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
This event is known as pollen pistil interaction. So there could be a question in your boards. What is pollen pistil interaction? Explain in brief. It's a CBSE boards question. What is pollen pistil interaction? You can write down the question also. Describe in brief. So everyone understood the pollen pistil interaction and why it is important? To make sure that the pollen of the same species is allowed to proceed further. Yes, Alia, you were asking something? I cannot hear Alia. I don't know why. Alia, can you come closer to the mic or something?
Hello.
Yes, now I could hear you louder, but the voice was breaking.
Sir, I was saying, can you repeat it?
Yes, can I repeat pollen pistil interaction?
Yes, sir. I've written.
Yes. You have written, but okay. So just see. So we know that pollens from all different species can just land on the stigma, right? So let's say this is from species 1, 2, 3, 4, all different species are there on the stigma, right? Now, all these pollens cannot fertilize with the egg cell. If they are not from the same species, they will not be able to make a viable seed which can germinate into a new plant, right? This is what is the definition of a species, correct, Alia?
Yes, sir.
So how can a plant make sure? Because this is external, a flower is exposed to the environment, thousands of pollen will fall. So there has to be a biochemical interaction, a recognition in which in the pollen grain. So next I'll be coming to pollen grain. So there are layers in a pollen grain. So the outermost layer interacts with the pistil first, the cell of the pistil. And this recognition allows the pistil to recognize which pollen is of the same species. Is it clear, Alia?
Yes, sir.
And then only that pollen, after this pollen pistil interaction has happened, forms a pollen tube. Okay. Now a tube starts, let's say this pollen 1 was the right pollen. Okay. And these were all wrong species. So this will be allowed to form a tube, which will go all the way down through the style towards the ovary. Do you understand, Alia?
Yes, sir.
Now, in a pollen, there is this outer layer. I made it very bad. Let me try it again. Okay. And then there is an inner layer.
But this is a structure of what?
Yeah, this is just a rough diagram I'm making for pollen. At certain places, the outer layer is missing, like these places, this place. Okay. There are certain points where the outer structure is not present, but at other places, this outer layer is present. Now, this outer layer is called exine. It's toward the outer side, you know. In the inner layer, this blue one is called intine. Is it clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Now, inside, there are two different cells. Okay. There are two different nucleus in a pollen. This one type of cell is called a generative cell. And the other cell is called a vegetative cell. Now, they are not half and half divided like I have made there. In a 3D, try to imagine both the cells like they are separate, but still they are present together. Can you imagine it? They are free to move around. Sometimes this comes on the top, the other comes on the top, but they are two different distinct cells. Do you understand? With distinct cytoplasm and distinct nucleus. Now this nucleus is called vegetative nucleus because it's present in vegetative cell, and this is called generative nucleus because it's present in generative cell. But do you understand this? Yes, Alia. Alia, I'm not able to hear you, but I hope you're not asking something this time.
Sir, I was saying yes, sir.
Okay. Now, there are many things that I have to tell you here, so pay attention. This exine, tell me what kind of a structure do you think pollen is? Pollen grains, do they have to be very fragile or do they have to be very rigid and hard structures?
Rigid and hard.
Why? Why is that?
Because they like travel everywhere. So whatever external, like the weather or something, they can't be affected.
Yes, perfect. So pollens has to be rigid, hard structures. That's why this exine, the outermost layer of this pollen, is made up of a chemical called sporopollenin. Sporopollenin. Write down. This has been asked in your entrance. Sporopollenin. And sporopollenin is such a hard polymer in nature that it is almost non-reactive to anything. So it is very, very inert polymer. So write down sporopollenin is an inert, almost enzymatically indestructible, chemically indestructible, almost indestructible. It cannot be destroyed in nature easily. So it is inert, biological polymer. Sporopollenin is an inert, indestructible biological polymer.
Sir, this is a chemical, right?
Yes, just like, you know, cellulose.
Yes.
Cellulose, what is cellulose? Where it is present? Cellulose, it's present in green leaves, right? Leaves. We cannot digest cellulose. We can digest starch. Remember digestive system, class 11th, everyone pay attention. Which enzyme did we use in our body, in a human body, to digest carbohydrates? This enzyme is also present in our saliva.
Salivary amylase.
Yes, amylase. Amylase, all the enzymes, their name ends with ase. Peptidase, lipase, amylase. Okay. So we have amylase. Animals which feed only on plants, herbivorous animals like ruminant animals, cattle, like cows, goat, buffalo, deers, they have cellulase in their body, which helps them to digest cellulose. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
We cannot digest cellulose. We can only digest the starch component of the green leaf that we are eating, whether it is a spinach or any grass or anything that we eat. That's why if a human tries to just survive on leaves, just like a cow or a goat or a buffalo, it will be very difficult because the cellulose component will just go undigested out of the body. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
So just like that, a cellulose is a biological biomolecule, macromolecule. It's a polymer. And what are our tissues made up of? What is human tissue, animal flesh made up of? Classification, animal kingdom. People, what is one characteristic feature of being an animal? Cellulose is one feature of being a plant. Remember? What is one feature of being an animal?
We are warm-legged.
What, Arpit?
Sir, we are warm-legged animals.
Oh, okay. We are, of course, but animals are also cold-blooded animals. What is present in sponge which makes it? Sponges?
Pores.
Spores? No, not spores. Okay. Figure it out. Class 11th, go back to the classification chapter. The first thing that you will read about sponges is this. Okay. But you understood what is sporopollenin? It's an inert biological polymer from which exine is made up of. So write down, sporopollenin is a major component of exines of the pollen grain. Exine and intine together makes the pollen grains wall. Okay. Exine is the outer layer, intine is the inner layer. And sporopollenin is a major
Excuse me,
component.
sir.
Yes, sir. Arpit.
Sir, each pollen is semicircular in shape.
Pollens are of all different shapes and sizes in nature. There are big pollens, there are hairy pollens, there are sticky pollens, round pollen, like radiated pollen, spiny pollen, all sorts of pollen are there. Elongated. So different plants produce different shapes and sizes of the pollen grains. I'm just trying to tell you here that sometimes in a pollen there are accessory structures in pollen grains, like some feathery structures will be there. Okay, just like there is a feathery structure associated with the seeds of dandelion. Have you seen the seeds of dandelion? That dandelion is a thing which you blow, and all these things just like blow in the air like
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yes, Fatima, you understood. They are whitish.
Yes, sir.
You see
Yes,
many
sir.
photos where you are blowing in that dandelion structure and they are all going out.
Yeah.
So they contains a seed at the base, and that seed has feathers attached, so that those feathers can stay in air and can fly with air current to a very long distance to spread the seed. Similarly, there are many pollens. Depending on if that pollen grain is transferred by wind, it also will have some feathery structures associated with it.
Sir, the feathers on that seed is the exine?
No. They are not exine. They are degradable. I'm just telling you they are accessory things. So Arpit asked, are all pollens like this? So no, there can be feathery pollens as well, right? You understand?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the cell, when it comes to the actual structure of the pollen, whether whatever is their shape and size, they will be having an exine, like an outer layer, which contains sporopollenin to make it hard and rigid and very, very sustainable, durable in nature, right? Just like I think Fatima said, right? Sorry, what Arpit? Arpit, you're mute if you're speaking.
Sir, I didn't say anything.
Okay.
So is it because of sporopollen that the pollens can be fossilized?
Yes, right. Now, when when a pollen is fossilized, basically most of the times during fossilization of a pollen, the generative cell and the vegetative cell dies. Okay, do you understand? Seeds can remain viable even after fossilized seeds, but pollen grains, they can remain as a structure. Suppose they got trapped between it was a significant pollen which you could see from your naked eye. It was a big pollen, let's say 1 millimeter or something, and it got crushed between the layers of mud, which later on became sandstone, and you figured out that there were pollen fossilized in between, but the cells will die, no? Right? Yes, Mehraj, you
Yes,
understand?
sir. Yes, sir.
But the structure will stay because of exine. Do you understand? Because it's difficult to degrade exine because it's made up of sporopollenin. So it's because of sporopollenin that the structure of pollen grain can be fossilized. Is it clear, Mehraj? Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Yes. But you also have to understand that it's not that the pollen will be viable and you can again use it to fertilize another species or the same species. Is it clear? Because the cells inside may die. Okay. Everyone say yes or no? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's move forward. So this, I told you that at various places there are, this exine is missing. So write down, why is exine, the outermost layer is missing at various as small pockets in a pollen. Can anyone tell me why is it missing? Any logic? Biology is all about logic. Yes, Fatima.
Where from there the stigma will grow.
From there the pollen tube will grow. You are right.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that one.
I understood what you, yeah. So because the pollen tube is just this vegetative cell. So let's first write down a mature pollen, write down. So you have drawn this and written everything which I have written on the board.
No, sir.
No. So first draw this. mark these, label these. Just a general structure of pollen. Write about sporopollen. It is an inert biological polymer, which is a major component of the outer wall of the pollen, which is exine. If you're, when you are done, let me know. I'll go with the pollen tube then.
So done.
Done, Fatima, Alia?
Yes, I'm.
Okay. Shall I move forward, Mehraj? Mazia? Fatima, Munir?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay. Now, listen to me. Write down, I'm dictating right down. In a mature pollen grain, there are two cells present. First is the generative cell. Now this generative cell, it has one nucleus in the beginning, okay? Everyone listening? When it is mature and when it lands after after pollination, and when this tube starts forming, just before that, this generative cell divides its nucleus mitotically. There is a mitotic division. Now, pollen grains are always haploid structure. They are N. Is it clear, everyone? Say yes. Say yes or no. Pollen grains, because they are gametes, right? So they have to be haploid. Now, inside this, the generative cell is also haploid and the vegetative cell is also haploid. Is it clear? There are two haploid cells inside. Okay. Because there are two haploid cells inside, it does not make the structure a diploid structure. No, it is still haploid. I will tell you why. Yes, Fatima, any question? How? Yes, good. Because the generative cell and the vegetative cell have very different functions. And when I talk about gametes, only this generative cell serves the purpose of a gamete. And it is haploid, so the pollen is also haploid. Okay. Let's first try to understand the generative cell. Now this generative cell has a nucleus which is haploid. When a haploid nucleus divides mitotically, what will happen? Fatima, you tell me. A haploid nucleus is dividing mitotically into two. So what will happen? What will be the ploidy of both?
Haploid only.
Haploid only, correct? Because it's an equational division. Whatever divides through mitosis remains equal. Yes? Yes or no? Yes. So this generative cell, just before fertilization, divides into two by mitosis and it makes two male nucleus. Two male nuclei are present. Both are N. N plus N. Now again, they are not diploid because they are individual different nucleus N and N. Is it clear, people? This is very important. And this generative nucleus give rise to the male nuclei, which is the equivalent of a male gamete. Okay. This is the gamete. Now, what is the role of vegetative cell then? Yes, Fatima, any question?
So there will be two gametes.
Yes, there will be two male nuclei. This is the twist. So in one pollen, just before pollen tube starts growing, the male nucleus divides into two. And now there are two haploid male nucleus, which can be said two male gametes. Okay, inside one pollen. I'll tell you why it happens. Now, what is the role of vegetative cell then? Vegetative cell. Vegetative cell, again, this was haploid. This is also haploid. Its only role is to form the pollen tube. So this cell forms the pollen tube. Is it clear? Is it clear, people? Say yes or no. Now look here. I'm making a this is a big pollen which is forming a tube inside a stigma. You all can appreciate it is just a zoomed in diagram. Okay. This is stigma. This is pollen grain. Now, by the time this tube is forming, let's say this tube is formed and it reached till here. Okay, it will go even deeper. It will actually go all the way down to the ovary. Remember, I told you this in the first class, in the last class, I mean. Yes or no? This tube will go all the way down to the ovary. Say yes or no. Is it clear to you? Quick.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Now, see, inside the pollen, there has to be 2 nuclei, but because pollen tube is forming, now there are 3 nuclei. So in front, there is 1 nuclei which leads. This nuclei leads in the pollen tube.
So how 3 nuclei?
2 male nuclei and 1 vegetative cell nuclei.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the nuclei which leads in a pollen tube, again, entrance question, is the vegetative nuclei or vegetative nucleus, singular. And just behind them, there are 2 male nuclei. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is how a pollen tube moves. So vegetative nucleus, because this vegetative cell only is making this tube. And within that, our 2 male nuclei are just swimming through that and reaching where they have to reach. Is it clear, everyone? Ultimately, this vegetative nucleus will be of no use, and these 2 will go and do the fertilization. Do you understand? Everyone, do you understand? Say yes or no.
Sir, how 2 gametes will fuse 1 ovum?
Yes, that will come to in a bit. Okay. This is the growing. First, make this that I have just drawn here. This is growing pollen tube.
And sir, you just left between, like you were giving some statement.
Was I?
Yeah.
I was just saying that this is how. So this is how the tube is formed, and these 2 male nuclei will later on play a role in fertilization. Now,
No, before like mature pollen grain, in a mature pollen grain, there are 2 cells present first. Yeah, you are giving something.
yes, I was telling you, in a mature pollen grain, there are 2 cells present. One is generative cell and the other is vegetative cell. And then I asked you to make this diagram. So this generative cell, okay, write down. The generative cell gives rise, sorry, the generative cells divides mitotically. The generative cell nucleus divides mitotically to give rise to 2 male nuclei. Give rise to 2 male nuclei. And the vegetative cell is responsible for the formation of pollen tube. Is it clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Now, there was a very good question by Fatima. I think it was Fatima who asked, how will two male nuclei go and fuse with one egg cell, right, Fatima?
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is where formation of zygote comes into picture, and it's not two male nucleus which goes and fuses with one egg cell. Okay, there is a concept in plants known as double fertilization. You know about, you must have heard this term, double fertilization event. Have you heard this? It's also in your book in NCERT. Okay, Fatima, it was your question.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Now, to make you understand what happens to the two male nuclei, you will have to wait till tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll finish, because for this first I have to make you understand the embryo sac. So there is a plant, and in angiosperms there is an embryo sac. So we'll come to this tomorrow. Okay. So there are two fertilizations happening at the same time simultaneously. There is not one fertilization, there are two fertilizations, in which one male gamete fertilizes with egg cell and the other male gamete fertilizes with something else. Now, what is that something else? For that, I have to explain you the embryo sac, and there we will go tomorrow. Today, we have few minutes left, so I'll finish with this pollen part. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Pollen grain is clear to you. It has two cells, and ultimately in a pollen tube, it has three nucleus moving. This is clear to you. Okay, right? Now write down few things. In plants, sorry, in angiosperms, there is a distinct event called double fertilization event. It is the characteristic feature of angiosperms. It only happens in angiosperms. There's a distinct event known as double fertilization, which takes place. Now let me tell you, just write this down. In double fertilization, there are two fertilization events happening. The first one is where the male nucleus, which is haploid, okay, it fuses with egg cell, which is present in the ovary, which is again haploid. Is it clear, everyone? And clearly it will form a zygote, and the zygote will be diploid,
Right.
and this zygote will go on to form embryo, which again is diploid, and this embryo is present in seed. Okay, it reaches here. Is this clear? The first thing, this is the normal fertilization which you were expecting, right, Fatima?
Yes, sir.
There is another fertilization that happens where, so I'm writing this as male nucleus 1, okay, where the male nucleus 2, which is of course male nucleus and a haploid, it fertilizes with polar nuclei. Just write it today, we will discuss it tomorrow. Polar nuclei, and gives rise to endosperm. Okay, now these two events are happening in the same embryo sac. That's why this event is called double fertilization event. Is it clear, everyone?
Polar nuclei, does it have a ploidy?
It has. I did not wanted to write it, but since you asked, it is diploid. So a male nucleus fuses with, it is not actually diploid. Let's not write any ploidy here. Let's wait for tomorrow. where I explain you the embryo sac first. Okay.
Okay. Then can you come back and meaning like can you tell us the ploidy?
Yes, tomorrow I'll do that. That's why I'm leaving this place empty, this and this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So see you tomorrow, everyone. I think it's time.